Okay, so am I recording? Yeah, I'm recording. So welcome everybody. This is the third day of our hemodynamic lags conference. I'm Ioannis Pappas. You've probably seen my face before. And this day is going to be more of a workshop and practical day. So we're going to try and demonstrate some of the tools that we're using to sort of extract information related to hemodynamic lags. With me, I have Leah, that's going to help with the workshop. I have Blaze, who's the mastermind between all the pieces and aspects of software that's going to be presented today, and Ben and Sinem and Tom. So just sort of a heads up, this is going to be a more of a free-form presentation. So we're going to be showing you some pre-recorded videos of some of the aspects of the software that we're using. It's going to be a three-part presentation. So the first one is going to be me talking about showing an introduction to Riptide, which is the software developed by Blaze to extract hemodynamic lags from fMRI data. The second part will be an application of Riptide to clinical data, and that's going to be demonstrated by Leah. And then the third one is going to be a presentation of the software Hocke that is also going to be presented by Leah. But as I mentioned before, this day, we're going to be more of a free form kind of thing. So I will be showing the videos, but please feel free to ask questions to any of us. If I don't have the answers, I'm pretty sure that one of us will have. And just, as I said, just feel free to ask questions at any time during the presentations of the video.
Probably over the QA.
Correct. One thing to note is that we are not going to provide assistance with installing the software. So I'm hoping that people followed the instructions successfully that were presented in the website. So apologies, it's sort of impossible to help 40 people individually to sort of install the required packages. So we're going to tacitly assume that you already have the required software installed in your computers. If you have difficulties or there are certain things that you didn't figure out regarding installation, we can definitely address them at the end of this workshop or post hoc via Slack in the channels that in the channels that I created in the Slack. So
I mean, just to be clear, we'll help you with installation. We just can't do it right now because it will delay everything.
Yes, we can do it. Yes, we can do it now because as Blaze said, it's just going to delay the entire thing. So
you also can follow along, and if you have questions, ask them now. And if you want them to install it, just come later to Slack and ask us about it.
Yep. Okay, so let me share my screen. So the first video is presented by me, and it's about the use of Riptide. Riptide, as you might already know, is a software package that's been developed by Blaze, and it works on fMRI data and its primary purpose is to extract the hemodynamic lags from your data. So this is going to be an introductory video made by me on how to use this software. Any questions that pop up, please put them in the Q&A and we'll answer them. I can pause the video and sort of unmute myself and answer them directly, or Leah or Blaze can also do that as the video has been presented. So here we go. Hi, my name is Ioannis Pappas. Hope you enjoyed the conference. In this short tutorial, I will show you a quick and practical way for denoising your fMRI data from the low-frequency oscillation signal. Okay, here we go. This analysis will be performed using Dr. Blaise Frederick's Riptide software package. First, download the latest version of Riptide from Blaise's GitHub page as shown on the screen. This version heavily depends on Python 3 with some extra dependencies that you can see in the documentation. The way that I prefer doing this is first to create a conda environment and install Riptide and knowledge dependencies there. There are alternative ways, for example, Singularity or Docker, that you can also find information for in the documentation. Okay, given that your installation is successful, already making a break here. I just want to clarify for those that have Hocke's eyes and vision. The version that I'm using, the version that I used for this Riptide was the developer version. That's why you can see here in the browser that I'm sort of using the developer. This is the version that was actually pushed from Blaise. This is the latest version that was actually pushed to the world from Blaise very recently. So if you go to the website, if you go to Riptide website, you will find the latest version that is available to you and is compatible with what I'm discussing further down the line here. You should be able to use Riptide. For me, one quick way to do this is to basically go to my command line and type Riptide in my environment like this. Pressing enter. If Riptide installation is successful, I should be getting all the available options right here. Okay. Given that your installation is successful, I will now show you how to run Riptide on your data. For this tutorial, I'm going to use test data that are already included with Riptide. This data lives inside your Riptide folder. In my particular case, my Riptide folder is this one right here. And then the data lives in this specific path, which is data examples src. If you do ls and see what is in that folder, you will see a bunch of data that can be used for testing Riptide. Of particular interest for this tutorial is this data set right here, which is called subriptidetest.nifty. It is worth noting that Riptide has also bits format support both for input and output. More information on this can be found on the documentation. Okay, so let's have a quick look at this data. So I will use FSL eyes to sort of give you a quick glance in this data. So as you can see, this is pre-processed fMRI data. It's a 4-dimensional file, so you can go, you can spatially navigate in X, Y, Z, and you can also see that this is sort of a time course. So as time goes by, you have different slices with different values. So this is sort of a classic 4D fMRI data set, and that is minimally pre-processed. The way that I usually do my pre-processing for Riptide is I slice time correct, I motion correct, and then potentially I smooth, although the latter can be done within Riptide. So as I mentioned, you don't need to do any fancy pre-processing, sort of the basic pre-processing that involves motion correction, slice timing, and potentially some smoothing will do for your data. Okay, given that you have your data and that is minimally pre-processed, we can now run Riptide. In essence, Riptide does cross-correlation of the time activity of each voxel with a probe regressor to determine the time delay in each voxel. Eventually, Riptide outputs correlation and lag maps, as well as your data denoised after this cross-correlation derived regressor has been removed. Let's see how we can do this. I'm going to go back to my command line right here, and I'm going to start typing what the command that is going to run a basic Riptide run on this particular data set that I just showed you before. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type Riptide, which is the main command. Then I'm going to type my test, then the name of my test data, which is this. Then I'm just going to sort of put a path for my output data, the Riptide output. Here I'm just using a specific path that I've already created for this tutorial. Obviously, you can use any path that you want. And then finally, at the end of this path, I'm just going to sort of put a prefix that's going to be appended to the beginning of all of my output data. This is how I want it to be. And then I'm going to add two more options. One of them is going to be filter band, and I'm going to define this as LFO. And then another one is going to be passes. That's going to be 3. And I'm also going to add this option right here to basically not restrict the output files that will be provided from Riptide. This is sort of a command that tells you spit out every output file that might be relevant or might not be relevant for your analysis. Okay, so this is sort of like the basic bare bones command that we can use to run Riptide. As I said, as it is now, Riptide will use a global mean signal as an initial regressor for cross-correlating every voxel with it, and then it will output all the relevant measures based on that. So just to go again really quickly over the arguments again, this is the first one is basically your input data. The second one is your path and your prefix of your output data. This one right here. The third one is the frequency band of interest. As we've discussed before, the low frequency oscillation band, the band from 0.009 to 0.15 hertz is our band of interest, i.e. the low frequency oscillation band. So this command basically filters your data to that particular frequency band. The third argument, passes, is a specific option that directs Riptide to perform the delay analysis 3 times. What does that really mean? Well, the idea is that Riptide will create a new estimate of this sort of initial global noise signal regressor by aligning all of the time course in the data to bring the global signal in phase. Then a new regressor is going to be built by averaging these, and then the process continues. So basically the idea behind this is sort of to refine the initial global regressor and make a better regressor that is going to be eventually used for cross-correlating all of your data. This option just tells you how many times this is going to happen. And as I explained before, this is sort of an output option that tells you, output all of the Riptide data. Okay, so before running this, I will also show you some additional input arguments that might be useful to you prior to pressing play. Okay, so first, as I mentioned before, Riptide can handle some of your pre-processing steps. So for example, this is just an example. One can type the trend order and set it to 1. This is going to do linear detrending for your data. Another option could be spatial filtering. So if you don't want to filter your data prior to your Riptide analysis, you can use spatial filt and then set the millimeter size for performing the smoothing. Now, with respect to the calculation of the regressor, with which, basically all the cross correlations are going to happen, there are a couple of options that are worth mentioning. So, as I mentioned before, the way that Riptide is doing cross correlation in its very basic form is using the global signal as an initial regressor that's going to basically keep getting refined. The two following arguments can give you some flexibility with respect to that. For example, in some studies presented in the conference, people use the superior sagittal sinus as a regressor. So how can we do this? Well, one easy command to use, one easy argument for the Riptide command, I want to be more specific, is to use global mean include. So what is this going to tell you is that it will force Riptide to use voxels for the initial regressor calculation that lie only within that masks. So, for example, let's say that you have an fMRI mask like the one that I will show you right now. So this is a functional mask that I've created for the Riptide data. As you can see, there are ones only within this particular, only within the brain basically, and then zeros outside the brain. So for example, one can use this mask to sort of force the initial regressor to be calculated only within that mask. Theoretically, this is sort of equivalent to, in this particular case, to use the global mean as the initial regressor. So one can sort of do this and force the global mean to be calculated with voxels only within this mask. Okay. Another useful option is the sort of opposite of that, which is the global mean exclude. So this basically tells you, this option tells Riptide to not take into consideration voxels that are within that mask. Now, why is that useful? For example, in my lesion studies, I usually use this option with input my lesion mask. So for example, I can have a lesion file right here. Thus, I'm sort of restricting Riptide for taking into consideration the lesion signals that can potentially contaminate my regressor. Okay, so I showed you global mean include and global mean exclude. The same goes, sort of the same philosophy goes with the refinement process. So there are additional arguments such as refine include and refine exclude. That sort of, the same principle is applied. You want to take into consideration or not take into consideration specific voxels when you're doing the refinement process of your regressor. A final useful command is core mask. Core mask is basically an option that tells you where do you want Riptide to do the cross correlations. So, for example, as I showed you before, one can use this mask that one created for the fMRI data and force Riptide to do cross correlation only within that mask and not anywhere else. So for example, if you have noisy voxels in the background or sort of other peculiarities with your data, this mask will sort of like help you restrict the analysis within that, within the area of your interest. Okay, so I showed you several options that can be used for sort of like flexibly tailoring your Riptide command to your study. I will sort of now try and run this very basic command and see what we're getting. So one presses enters, and then Riptide is running. I've actually, for the purposes of this tutorial, I've actually run all of this. So I'm going to go directly to the results. So I'm going to go to this is the folder that I actually define as the output folder for my data. So I'm going to do ls and actually see what lies in it. And there is a lot of data here that it might be difficult to understand all at once, but I'm going to try and go through the ones that are potentially most relevant for you. And to do this, I will show them to you in FSLIs if needed. So the first file that I'm going to talk about is and I've actually already loaded them, so I'm going to take these guys off. Is the file that's been named output max time map, and this is basically the actual lag time map. So I can put some coloring here, and I can just do a little bit of a I can do a more confined range, or one can sort of like even do a little bit better. So this is a 3D Nifty file where one can sort of see the lag times. These are the times for each voxel in which the cross correlation with your refined regressor is maximal. So you can see here that, for example, this voxel has a lag time of 4 seconds compared to other voxels. For example, this voxel, it has a lag time of -1, so it's ahead of the regressor. So these are 3D files that are in the same space. I can actually overlay them on my data. Let me try and do this now. These are in the same space as my data, as my original data, and these are files that one can further process and extract values, for example, from specific parts of the brain. Okay. Another interesting file, and again, all of these basically live in this big bag of files that I define as output destination for my Riptide tutorial. Another very interesting file is the actual correlation value. So this map right here is the correlation value, the maximum correlation value at each particular time with the probe regressor. So you can see that one can sort of the range is from -1 to 1. So you can see that some voxels, have 0.5 correlation, some voxels have 0.4, and some voxels have potentially different correlations right here. Okay, so this is sort of some of the output data that can be useful for you. Now, the reason for this tutorial was basically, we wanted to sort of, I started talking about this tutorial with respect to denoising the data. Well, Riptide does all the hard work for you. So what I'm going to show you is that, and I mentioned again, all of these files lie within this folder. The next file that I'm going to show you is this file that says LFO filter cleaned. And this is basically your denoise data after the regressor has been removed. Remember, what Riptide is doing is it uses GLM filtering to basically remove the regressor from its voxel in the brain. Okay, now what is this regressor? You can actually see that in, and again, this is in the same folder as the other files. This is the regressor that Riptide has been removing from your data. So remember, this is different than other sort of types of denoising strategies, because this is a voxel-wise specific regressor that is being removed. And that regressor is basically the one that comes from cross-correlating its voxel's time activity over a range of lags with the initial probe regressor. Further analytics for sort of like how, you know, how this regressor is sort of mapped onto the data. The idea being how what is the GLM coefficient, for example, can be also found within the folder. I'm going to show you one specific map, which is the R map. This is basically the R value for the GLM feed in its voxel. And as you can see, some parts of the brain have higher values, some parts of the brain have lower values. This is the R value for the GLM after the noise regressor was fit to its voxel in the brain. And you can also, instead of an R value, you can also get the R squared if that's sort of like more meaningful to you. So I've shown you a bunch of files starting from the lag map, the correlation map, the actual clean data, what was removed from the data, and how did the GLM perform in its voxel. All of these overall will sort of give you an idea as to where basically the LFO signal lives in your brain, and eventually how to remove this from your data. So for example, if one wants to do subsequent analysis on their fMRI data, one can use the LFO filter clean bolt to sort of take this denoise data into consideration. If one wants to look at what is the lag time for each part of the brain and try and make hypotheses about why certain parts of the brain have lags compared to others, this is the map that one is interested in. If one wants to see how does the regressor fit in the GLM around the brain, one can use these GLM statistic maps to sort of get an understanding as to how big the fit is in each part of the brain. Okay, so I've showed you a bunch of maps that are basically nifty files that live within that. And those are not the only ones. You can find a lot of different maps that can be of potential interest to you for your specific study. One nice way to look at them in a sort of more comprehensive way is to invoke Riptide's graphic tool, which is called Tidepool. So the way to do this is you can press Tidepool with an ampersand, and then you sort of wait. Now, if you type that, you will see that basically Riptide is sort of automatically understanding that there is some meaningful data that I can sort of process within this folder. So it, as you can see, it filters by lag times or sort of the bits equivalent of that, which is sort of like max time map. So you can click on that and you can wait a little bit. It takes some time. Apologies, my cluster is a little bit slow. In your computer, it's probably going to be super fast. And there you go. So this is a very nice comprehensive overview of the maps that I sort of showed you one by one before. Okay, so let's go quickly around this Tidepool visualization to see what we have. So the first thing is the lag time. These are the max. This is the max time map that I just showed you before. This is basically this basically tells you what is the maximal time at which the cross correlation with the refined regressor is maximal. You can see a spatial view of the map right here. You can play with the range here or the color map here. In this panel, in the middle right panel, you can see the distribution over voxels of these lag maps. The 0 in this distribution is basically defined at the peak of the distribution. So it's arbitrarily defined at the peak of the distribution so as to allow easy cross datasets comparisons. And obviously, one might not be just interested in the lag times and can click on the different options. This is the correlation value. Again, this is the maximal correlation. This is the correlation, the maximal correlation at that particular lag time with the probe regressor. So as you can see, again, this is the distribution of the voxels. One can, for example, look at the R square, which is sort of the R square metric of how well the regressor fits the data. One can look at the GLM coefficients. Those are the ones that I showed you. Actually, I'm not sure if I showed them before, but these are the GLM coefficients. So how well, what are the coefficients after you feed the regressor to your data? And again, the distribution is shown here. Additional options, there are some additional panels that are worth explaining. On the bottom, you have the regressor. This is the regressor that's been used for performing the cross correlations. This is sort of a time domain representation. This is a frequency domain representation. And you can see how the regressor, after basically its different paths, is being refined and sort of like getting refined for performing a better cross correlation. Another panel that might be of interest to you is by clicking on different parts of the brain, one can see the correlation function on the x-axis here. So what you have is sort of the different time lags. On the y-axis, you have the correlation function, and you can see that, you know, this graph right here tells you that, hey, you know, at the lag minus 0.62 seconds, the correlation of this voxel with the refined regressor is maximal. So that's sort of like, you know, where the lag time, as you can see it right here, that's sort of the lag time that I'm gonna spit out. And yeah, so I think this is sort of a nice view, a nice sort of overall view of the data that's been produced by Riptide. What I didn't show you here, and this is something that you can really find, is basically the actual denoise data that's been output in the folder that I just described. I feel that everything that you need is basically in this folder that Riptide is producing all its data in. And yeah, I think this wraps up the basics of running Riptide in one's fMRI data. More specific questions and suggestions that can match one's study. For example, there are differences if one wants to study healthy people or patients with a cerebral vascular disease. Now, why, for example, one might want to explore a wider range of lags compared to healthy controls, because, for example, the blood might take more time to arrive to the brain. These will be addressed by Leah in another tutorial. And of course, feel free to contact us for any extra information and suggestions. Thank you very much for this. Cool. That was me, sort of describing, doing an introduction to Riptide. I'm trying to see Let me see. So Leah, do we have questions?
Yes, we're trying to answer them right now. There was one for you, the last one I would use in the open one.
Sorry, what are you saying?
The first one is, can you expand on what you mean by refined regressor in this context? The example you used or others we could consider. Apologies if I missed a bit of the start.
Yeah, so refined regressor means that the idea is, so you start with an initial regressor with which you're doing the cross correlation over a range of lags. Then refinement basically means making a new regressor by aligning all the voxels that have high correlation with that regressor, and using that, I think Blaze, I think the mean is used right over those voxels or a principal component. I don't remember exactly.
Principal component.
And principal component, and then a principal component of that regressor is being used again to cross correlate all the voxels with that regressor, and that process is getting repeated again and again and again. This is just a process to basically make a better regressor for correlating with your data without inducing spurious correlations. I don't know if Blaze, you want to expand a little bit on the refinement.
Yeah, so the refinement, the point of the refinement is that if you start with the global mean regressor, that is an average over a bunch of voxels with a bunch of different delays of the moving regressor. So it's going to be sort of fundamentally blurred in time a little bit. For healthy controls, where you generally have a fairly peaked histogram with a strong central tendency and not that wide a distribution of time values, that's fine, and you'll get a pretty good estimate of the moving regressor. But as you get into more pathological circulation, where you may have a broader distribution, if you average over a wide range of time delays, you may get something that looks less and less like the moving regressor that you're looking for. So what the refinement process does is, by making an initial estimate of what the delay is in every voxel, and then aligning what we think is the moving component, you can get a better estimate of the driving signal. And so originally what Riptide did was it would just run 3 passes, because we found that, sort of heuristically, 3 passes made it converge very well. Alan Champagne wrote a paper last year, 2019, where he was looking at CO2 fluctuations, and he actually came up with a really good idea, which is to implement a convergence threshold, which is to say, just keep iterating until from one step to the next, the mean squared error doesn't change by more than 0.0005 or whatever the threshold was. So that's now in there. So you can actually you can do a dynamic convergence threshold rather than just a fixed number. The point of that, it usually doesn't matter, and if you just do 3, you're fine. But the convergence threshold gives you a little more confidence that you've actually come to the right level. I'm happy to take a couple of the questions off of I can talk a lot faster than I can type. There's been a bunch of questions about what sort of the minimal preprocessing you need is. Basically, slice time correction, I would consider an essential preprocessing step, because if you don't do it, then the slice acquisition times will dominate your delay map. You'll actually just see stripes showing when all of the slices were acquired, because that's the most consistent and coherent thing in any of those slices, and it's very distracting when you're trying to look at physiological delays. As to motion correction, or motion correction is generally pretty helpful, because anything that if you don't motion correct, then you'll get these sort of at a place where you have a large motion, you're going to get a coherent regressor in every voxel that sort of shows, if the head twists or something, you'll get a lot of change in a lot of voxels at the same time, and that's going to show up as a 0-time correlation between all of the data. And while we try to get rid of that sort of thing in the refinement process, if you start out with a big contaminating signal, that's going to be a bit of a problem. So I would suggest doing motion correction at least. motion.
For that, it's also really important to always look at your pre-filled in the tide pool. If you see, for example, your pre-filled and your count one and so on, you can check these things too.
Yeah.
So if,
yeah, another thing you want to do is probably check to make sure you don't have any T1 relaxation going on during the first few points, because if you have a big ramp coming down at the beginning, that's also going to show up as a zero-time correlation, which you don't want. So if you need to skip a few points, if you don't have enough dummy acquisitions at the beginning of your scan, and in my experience on Siemens scanners, you typically don't, because it's the Siemens scanner sets it automatically to a number that is too low.
Yeah.
Other questions?
One thing, Blaze, is that I think also Tom asked about this is, whether it's sort of recommending doing the pre-processing in Riptide or sort of before Riptide. And I think that's, for example, for me, with respect to smoothing, right? Like, why do you want to produce additional smooth files before putting them into Riptide? So you can sort of do it at once as you're processing your data, as you're routing Riptide, excuse me. So it's sort of a preference, I guess, for me.
Yeah, and I think what you want Riptide to do what it does and nothing else. And so if you have it do this sort of processing, it will do this processing internally. It will determine what it thinks is the low frequency regressors. And then when it does, in the final step, when it does the GLM regression, I don't know if you have sharp eyes, you'll notice it rereads the original data before it does that. So it does all of this regression off of the original completely unprocessed data. So the idea is it will remove the low frequency regressors and nothing else. So the data you get out of that low, the LFO clean data hasn't been filtered, it hasn't been motion regressed or anything like that. So you can just take it, you just do this step, and then you can move on with the rest of your processing. It tries to only do the one thing and not affect anything else.
And just a follow-up question there.
Yeah.
It seemed like from the responses in the QA, it seemed like Riptide can do a lot of the pre-processing. And so, are you saying that the pre-processing that Riptide is doing is only to get a better estimate of the lags, and that so that people should still plan on doing the pre-processing on their own for their analysis?
Yeah, any of the things,
because it was a little bit confusing. Yeah.
Sorry, any of the things that Riptide does are for Riptide's purposes alone. It does not pass that on to the output clean data. So
okay. Thanks. That's really helpful.
Sort of filter data. It just does it internally for you to make better lag estimates, and you still have to do them offline if you want them for other processing things. Yeah.
Great. Thanks.
And piggybacking it, I think we have a question about whether there is I think that people ask about whether the pre-processing in Riptide and FSL is the same. I'm just sort of pulling all these questions together because they're sort of relevant, and we'll get back to the other. So the question is whether the pre-processing in Riptide plays and pre-processing in FSL, I guess in smoothing, I'm not sure exactly, whether those give you the same sort of outputs.
I mean, roughly the same, but I mean, again, none of that will carry through and get passed on to the output data in Riptide. So if you want something that FSL does, you should do it in FSL.
In FSL. Yeah.
There was a question about white matter regression. One of the things that we've found is that the white matter regressor is frequently, it appears to be dominated by a global mean signal delayed by several seconds relative to the gray matter. So in that case, if you do white matter regression before you run Riptide, you've already regressed out a copy of the signal you're looking for at the wrong time delay, and that can lead to spurious correlation. So I would advise, if you're going to do that, do it after Riptide.
Yeah, one rule of thumb is to keep all the noise in your data before you run Riptide. Exactly.
Yeah, and I think there was.
There's a question about the regression, Blaze. I think one question is about whether this is a stepwise regression or if this is a simultaneous regression, based on previous work that says that if you do it stepwise, you might reintroduce. I think there was a discussion in the conference before about that.
I'm not sure. Are you asking if this is like Male's procedure?
I think
I think that's Jonathan Power and
yeah,
question, right?
No, it's not. And that's the way we originally did things. That's the original name of the Riptide algorithm, comes from a regressor interpolation of progressive time delays, where we made a bunch of copies at a bunch of time delays, regressed them all out in FSL. And that, aside from the fact that took forever, we found that reduced degrees of freedom more than we wanted. So what we do is we try to find the optimal delay and then regress one and only one regressor out of every voxel. So yeah, I will not pretend to understand the statistics well enough to tell you that exactly what that does in terms of reduction of degrees of freedom, but I believe it reduces degrees of freedom less than regressing several copies of the same regressor out. Does that answer the question? Or
yeah. One question that I think as you started typing is, I use the word lag a lot, but maybe the naming of the maps was a little bit inconsistent with what I was sort of describing. So I think you were already typing it, but I don't know if you want to enter it live.
Yeah, so, okay, so one of the big changes, and if you noticed in the tide pool window how it looks for files with two different types of names, with either the lag time or the max time map. Between version 1 and version 2, I really tried to rethink the names to make them a little more informative. We've had terms that we've thrown around in the lab for so long that they're very familiar to us and we know exactly what we mean, but they don't exactly communicate to the world what you're talking about. So we calculate a cross correlation and we find the time delay in the cross correlation where you have the maximum correlation value. We used to call that time the lag time. Now we call it the max time. That is the time of the maximum. And then we used to call the value of the correlation at the maximum time delay. Variously, we'd call it max core, max CC, or lag strength, which is completely ridiculous name. So now it's called max core. So max core is the maximum correlation coefficient, and it occurs at max time. If that's clear.
Yeah, sorry about, I was sort of playing between but yeah, the lag time is basically, the lag time maps refer to at which basically lag time the correlation is maximum. That's sort of the lag time. And the correlation coefficient is the actual value of the correlation on that particular lag time. So if you look, I showed you one panel in title where you can sort of see at its voxel the correlation function as a function of lags. So the correlation coefficient is actually that value at which the maximum value of the correlation across these sort of different time lags. So apologies, I've sort of been playing between definitions here, but the output is exactly the same, whether that's been named lag time or maximum time. Okay, I think there was a question from Javier. Let me see. If your main interest is in obtaining lag maps instead of depositing, could you discuss what's a better option? Yeah, I guess the question is using the bipolar or the
yeah, okay, that gets into a difficult area. So one of the things that you may have noticed from some of the talks that we had before is that arterial blood is negatively correlated with the global mean signal. So Riptide, over all of the years we've developed it, has been very much biased towards venous blood, and the reason for that is that to expand on something that I forget who said it yesterday, but oxyhemoglobin is diamagnetic and deoxyhemoglobin is paramagnetic. And so I think the idea is that paramagnetic blood gives makes a magnetic field that causes dephasing, and arterial blood, highly oxygenated blood, does not. That's not exactly true. What's important is the relative susceptibility of the blood and the tissue. And arterial blood is actually more diamagnetic than the surrounding tissue. So there's actually there's a linear function at 86% blood oxygenation. The susceptibility of blood is exactly equal to the susceptibility of the surrounding tissue. So you get no bold signal whatsoever. At arterial oxygenation levels, which is like 100 to 86%, you get negative bold signals relative to what we consider bold signals. And then from 86% down, which is the regime we usually work in, you get what we call positive bold signals. So if you use the bipolar mode, the idea is that if you get a strong correlation with a negative value, then you're probably looking at an artery. So you might want to pick out those times to get the delays. Now, in practice, because there's this sort of weird contrast, you know, the contrast drops to 0 and then gets bigger again as the oxygenation changes, that can give you a sort of a weird hole in your delay map. If you use the unipolar mode, then you're at least biased entirely towards venous blood, and it's a little easier to talk about what you're seeing. If you put in the bipolar mode, that gives you a lot more information, but then you have to think carefully about you know, what the maximum correlation values mean. That said, I mean, if you're just denoising the data, you might want to use the bipolar mode. The fitting routines that I've been using so far haven't, they can be a little twitchy when you're in bipolar mode, but actually adding the hybrid mode that I talked about, where you look at the mutual information, works really well for that, because mutual information doesn't care what the sign of the relationship is. If you have a strongly negatively correlated signal, you have positive mutual information. If you have a strongly positive correlated signal, you also have positive mutual information. So that will just help you pick the biggest peak or the most related peak. So I hope that helps.
Perfect. So a question from Rachel. Actually, there are two questions. The first one is when it linearly regresses out the sifted global regressor, how does it do that? Does it apply some sort of zero padding?
Okay, so when it regresses out the shifted global regressor, no, it does not. So you may end up okay. When it calculates the correlation function, you can either do zero padding or you can do pre-correlation windowing, which is what I do. I apply a Hamming window by default, which gets rid of end effects. Strictly speaking, what I'm doing is a circular correlation, not a linear correlation. I should be zero padding the ends to do a linear correlation. Tried it both ways. It doesn't actually change the delay values that I calculate, and the circular correlation is faster. But the option is in there now in the newest version of Riptide to zero pad. You can set the zero padding if your heart's content. It will only slow it down, though, is my experience. So in terms of the shifted global regressor, we've talked about the global mean mode, where it starts with the global mean signal, right? So if you shift that back and forth, you're going to lose data off the ends, right? I mean, it's going to be data that you don't have. Now, if you have a wide range of delays over the entire time course, when you generate those shifted regressors during the refinement step, you actually do fill in the end bits, because if you have a couple signals that move off the ends, you can do you get a little data that goes out to the extent of your largest delay, and if you properly weight the data, you can actually get data off the ends of the cross of the global mean. In practice, I don't usually do that, just because those are sort of unknowably noisy, depending on how many voxels got shifted in that direction. When you supply a regressor externally, like in the example where Molly was talking about, where you actually have a time course that you've recorded of Untitled CO2, it uses the entire time course that you give it as the regressor. You can supply an external regressor and say, no, don't use the global mean, use this time course that I've given you. And if you give it something that starts 30 seconds before and ends 30 seconds after, it uses that entire time course. So if it wants some data that's off the end, it shifts it in from the data that it has. So I guess that answers the first part.
And then the second part is about the resolution of the final lag maps, the dependence on the TR, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, as I tried to point out on Monday, the time dependence on the TR is weak. Basically, you need to make sure that your signal is adequately sampled. And if you care about the low frequency oscillation, if you have a maximum signal of let's say 0.2 hertz, then as long as you have a TR of 5 or 5 seconds or less, then you should be able to get is it 5 seconds? No, it's 2.5. I think it's 5 seconds. You should be fine. The time resolution to discriminate delays is actually dependent on the length of the time course, not the TR. So if you fit the peak of the correlation delay, you can get sub-TR resolution. You get substantially lower resolution than, or better resolution than the TR. And I've actually tested that in simulations, and it works fine. You can essentially consider the measurement to be continuous relative to any time scale that you care about. I mean, I say that, but I don't know what time scale you care about. But for any time scale I care about, it's continuous.
Yeah, and I think so. There are three more questions. One of them is about perfusion values. The other one is upsampling, and the last one is about sort of reliability and sanity checking in cases where the data is. I think Blaise, you might, or Blaise and I can sort of answer these as the second part is, so we can sort of move on a little bit. I just want to say one final thing for Daniel. He mentioned a little bit about partial FOV data where the sagittal sinus is missing, or in cases of data where you have bits of the sagittal sinus. Based on my data, I've seen that the lag maps that I'm getting are pretty reliable. And I think Blaise can answer. I'm not sure if you, what is your answer, Blaise, with respect to the 7 Tesla data, or any other sort of reliability studies that have been done and sanity checks that can be done to make sure that the Riptide results are okay.
I don't know if there's a general answer to that. At this point, I can look, I can look at a delay map and say something's obviously wrong, but I don't really have it codified. I mean, to some extent, we've tried to give examples of different types of processing where there are rational values to start from that might help you. Like one of the things that I've found with the example when we were doing the gas challenge experiments, if you run those with Riptide's default, and I think Leah's going to talk about this later, if you run them with the default parameters, it will filter to the low frequency oscillation band, which will typically remove your gas challenge because it's lower frequency than the lower end of the LFOs. And so you'll do this enormous, 20% change in bold signal, and you look at your Riptide maps and say, wait, there's no signal whatsoever. That's because you accidentally filtered it out. So there's a couple places where you have to know that. It doesn't tell you that automatically. There are probably some checks I could put in by saying, well, look, you actually you have this enormous component in the spectrum outside of the region you're looking at, but at the moment I don't do that.
Just a very quick on the partial field of view. I've done that on data which has that, where there wasn't a sagittal sinus. Mm-hmm. It works fine if you have an external stimulus or if you have an, for example, periphery or something, but it also works for me with the partial field of view. I can't say that for all of them, but mostly there are enough vasculature in that view that it works.
Yeah, I mean, it works on HCP data where they have a very tight mask that strips out the superior sagittal sinus. Also, the ANTS alignment, I think, that's used in fMRI prep tends to pull out the superior sagittal sinus, but the global signal should do you fine. And then the final question I just wanted to get to here, it says, regarding upsampling, is this done automatically or can it be turned off? Both. It's done automatically and it can be turned off. What it does is by default, it will select an oversample factor of, well, it's as if you specified -1 on the command line, which is guess the best parameter that will get you a target resolution of 0.5 seconds or better. If you set -- oversample factor to 0, it will not do any upsampling.
Okay.
Sorry, I put actually one in answered, which wasn't answered because I thought we were coming to that.
I think it was the perfusion question, Leah, right? If you can extract perfusion values from, I'm not sure. Was that the question?
Yeah, that was the question.
Yeah.
Yep.
I would love to believe so, and we are trying that. We're seeing what we can do to try to get that. I mean, it gets you a different sort of perfusion that value because it's going to be, as I say, it's highly weighted towards the venous blood rather than the arterial blood. We're looking at ways to try to emphasize the arterial component to get something more akin to an ASL image. So far it doesn't do that, but we're working on it.
Yeah, maybe you want to put. Yeah, I think there's also a paper out there that they're sort of these guys are probing those concepts. But anyways, we have to move on because we have more material to cover. So I'm going to share my screen again, and let me see if I can do this correctly. And this is the amazing Leah. She's going to talk about more specific applications of Riptide. Here we go.
You've heard from Ioannis how to run Riptide, how to denoise signals, and how to look at the relevant output for denoising. Here I expand a little bit on the use of Riptide in clinical data using an example of the paper on Moya patients, which you see here. We have the scan prior to intervention as well as after surgical intervention or revascularization. For this kind of data, you would expect to find differences in legs before and after the intervention in the region that is affected, which is what you see here in figure 5, often Moya patients. You see how the affected region has long time delays, which is slowly shrinking over the months. I will go through the output of Riptide we use to look at a condition as such, including the histogram, the lag maps, and the variance map. To do so, open the example. It's in Manus, and there are 4 filter func scans. The first scan is before the intervention, and the 3 other scans are after the intervention, numbered in order. We can start with
Ioannis, can you stop for a second?
First, let's look.
So just saying the Manus example I have here as described in the program, you can download in the Slack channel. It's directly there. And there's all the output too, which I'm going to go over. So you can either just tag along or you can watch and later do it. But the example, nifty files and everything is there.
Yeah, my data was basically test data included with Riptide. Lee, I think, provided information about this this data, and this data is part of the study that Leah just described. So that I was thinking about that, Leah. I think we should have sort of mentioned that at the beginning, but yep.
The properties with FSR-HD. You see, for example, it has 450 data points and it has a TR of 2 seconds. You can also look at FSR ice or fossilize to look at the image itself. These are filtered func data, so they are pre-processed, they are slice time corrected, motion corrected, they have been temporarily high pass filtered and spatially smoothed. You can go through the voxels, and if FSR ice opens, you will see it is still in native space. And if you press Ctrl 3, you can get to the time course. Here, 450 time points, as we saw. So let's go into the folder. Example folder, wherever you have it. Make sure that you have the correct Riptide. I have to activate it on the cluster. You can also look where the Riptide is located and which one you're running with which Riptide. So I'm in my Riptide dev, which is perfect, developer version, and with Riptide -- help or -h, you can look at the options as you've seen before. And here you see in file and output name at the end as positional arguments, but you can put them at the end or beginning, it doesn't matter. We can choose short options, which are the analysis types, the denoising ones you've seen before, but we can here go into delay mapping. And so you have some preset parameters for the delay mapping analysis. It sets the range between -10 and 30 seconds to search for certain passes, and it limits your output that you don't do GLM and other unnecessary steps you do for denoising, for example. Okay. Let's run Riptide now. So first step with the predetermined parameters of delay mapping you just saw. For that, type just Riptide. If with which Riptide you got to the correct Riptide you want to use. You don't have to use the entire path, but because I submitted to the cluster, I have to. So I want to use Riptide def. Then you put the input file, which is the pre-processed filter func data in your example data. And lastly, the output file. So first output directory, which I just put in the same as the input file, just out1 and then subject number. And then last the subject name and delay mapping as the name for the Riptide output parameters. Output files. Then dash dash delay mapping, so we have all the predetermined parameters, and I submit it to the cluster. You can run it without the FSL sub. You will see if it starts running, it gives continuous updates of the process. So let's see if it is. Yep, here we have the output. You see, for example, it has correctly identified the data with 450 time points and a TR of 2 seconds and so on. Depending on your computer, it might take a while. But when it's done, when the analysis is run, we can look at the output files. You already know from Ioannis' slides where to search for the lags, which is maxtime_map, and how to use tidepool. So you can just search for it, for the file in your output, or make your life a little bit easier with typing the ls command and then use star time star or star max time star to find it. And here it is. Let's look what we find in the first scan. Remember, this is the scan before revascularization. So let's look at that scan in tidepool. If you don't know how tidepool works, you can always check the help option. It will give you all the options you can choose from. Let's look at a specific data set. So just type tidepool -- dataset, and then the data we are looking at, which is the out1 sub 00501 and then sub 00501 underscore delay mapping underscore enter. Now this is the scan before revascularization, as I said, and you see the lag map up top. Right side is left and left is right. You see this huge area on the right where blood flow is very delayed. That's the green and yellow. In addition, if you look at the lag distribution on the right, you see a rather wide distribution instead of a peaky one, and slightly skewed on the right towards longer delays. So there's a wide range of lags here, and they're more longer than usual. Lastly, and very importantly, we should always look at the regressor. If you look between pre-filled and, which is the initial estimate, and the pass 1 estimate of the regressor, there's a huge difference which is based on the filter we used, which you see in the shaded green area here. So if we blindly use software, we might miss some important parts of the data. The reason here is that the subject underwent a carbon challenge, which you beautifully see in the pre-filled data, but which isn't used at all in our regressor since it's at 1 divided by 360 seconds, so 0.0027 Hertz. We can now go back and look at the signal in the original data. You can open your data again in FSL Eyes, as we did before, and can visually inspect it. So FSL Eyes, filtered func data. Now we can look at the voxels throughout the brain. If you want to look at the temporal signal, use Ctrl+3 or View and in time series. And here we see the time course with the 450 data points again. You see, if we go through the data, this is a very pronounced signal throughout the brain, which would not have been taken into consideration if we had used the standard delay mapping parameters, which we used in Riptide before, with just delay mapping. We can choose an example voxel here, for example 39, 29, 23, and further examine it. So let's extract that voxel with FSL mean TS. So we need an input, FSL mean TS minus I, the input, as well as so that's the filtered func data, minus C from the voxel coordinates 39, 29, 23, and minus O example voxel.text. So our temporal signal is now saved in the example voxel.text, and we can look at it in showTC as part of the Riptide suite. So showTC -- help, and you can again look at it and see how it works. So just showTC and the text file, and then you might have to incorporate the TR here. You see showTC example voxel.text minus sample time and 2, since it's a 2-second TR. So just checking, we have the correct voxel, so just confirming. Now let's look at the power spectrum of that voxel. For this we need display type power, -- display type power, enter, and you see the power spectrum with hertz on the x-axis and power on the y. We can zoom in, and we can see where the peak frequency is located in the data. And here it is at somewhere 0.002 and 0.003, or around the 1 divided by 360 second cycle, which we calculated before from the stimulus paradigm. Another way to look at these signals is by looking at the pre-filled and pass 1 regressor from the Riptide output. To do so, let's find the output file for the regressors. So go into your folder where your output files are from the Riptide analysis called sub 005_01. And then see what's in this folder from the files. We are looking for JSON files, which directly has the initial as well as the pass 1 regressor. Because it is a JSON file, you can do that. In addition, JSON files also have the information of the TR and the sampling frequency, so you don't have to additionally give that information. So let's find the initial regressor, this one, initial moving regressor underscore time series. And let's plot it with -- display type time. You see the regressor in black, which is the initial regressor or the pre-filled, and in green is the one after pass 1. So if we now want to plot this in the power spectrum, as we did before, go back and display type instead of time, we need now power. And of course, we can look at it in the frequency domain here, and you see the sharp filter from 0.01 to 0.15 Hz in green. So the LFO band, which was the predetermined frequency domain above the original signal here in black, with high power below the 0.01 mark. So this is why we missed it. So let's run our previous analysis with some changes. This is our previous analysis. So let's change first the name. We want to this time go in the very low frequency to incorporate this new information. So -- filter band VLF. And let's increase the range where we search, since we maybe had a limited view with the range of 30 seconds. So -20 and 110. You can, by the way, also specify the frequency band manually, but let's stick right now to the predetermined ones. So now do the same for scan 2, scan 3, and scan 4. And I've already done it, so you don't have to do it, and you can just look in the example output folder and plug along. So now we can plot all the very low frequencies of Riptide output in Tidepool, which you just created, or which you know is in the example folder. Again, if you use Tidepool, you just use Tidepool minus dataset and just your output file. And here, changing it to the third scan. Going a little quicker here through this part, since it's just repeating plotting in Tidepool for 4 times. I'm adjusting the ranges from -20 to 90 seconds and the regressor on pass 1 so we can compare them. But here you see already in the second Tidepool window is a decrease from the area which you've seen before, which had these very long delays on the right side. With more months passing, you see again a reduction, and the 4th scan, when it comes, you see even less of the green yellowish areas when you adjust them all to the same search range. So that is reflecting that there is less of the long delayed blood flow in this area. You can also look at the distribution again. It's hard to compare them visually here, but you see a little bit in scan 3 and 4 that the distribution becomes much more peakier or narrower. So more delays are very close to 0 with a narrow range of delays. And that's exactly what we expect from recovery. And lastly, if you check the regressor again, we see now that the pass 1 has the low filtered version of the Convergence challenge. So we are taking this information now into account. As I said, the width of the histogram is hard to compare with eyes, but you can also plot them on top of each other. So just use showTC with the max time hist JSON for all the scans, or put a star where you would find the scan time, name 1, 2, 3, and they will be plotted on top of each other as you see here. Starting with scan 1 in lilac, scan 2 in blue, scan 3 in green, and scan 4 in yellow. Again, one is before intervention and the other ones are after. You also see beautifully how both the width and the skewness of the distribution is slowly normalizing itself to a healthy looking distribution with high peakiness. And this peakiness is exactly what we used in the paper in figure 4, which is also called kurtosis, and a measure we used in the paper to examine differences between a healthy population and moya patients. So now we go back to the black maps. So let's compare them more carefully. We can just use FSL eyes again with max times map and star for the VLF. So now we could theoretically look at them on top of each other and compare them, but however, as you can see, we can't really compare them directly with each other since they are all in native space. So our first step after Riptide is to standardize everything so we can compare between and within subjects. We do that by transforming them all into MNI space, such as the MNI 152 T1 3mm. These MNI anatomic images come usually as standard images with the FSL package, and you can find them right now in your example folder as well. In addition, we need a transfer matrix which transforms the func data to the standard image. That's the .mat file in your example folder. If you would have run flirt in FSL within feed or ICA, or just flirt by itself or fMRI prep, you would have gotten registration folder or ANAT folder with the matrix. So this saves the matrix of the rotation and translation, which looks like this. You can do that within the Riptide toolbox as Riptide to standard. If you don't know how to use it, there is always --help. And you can just point Riptide to your feed directory or fMRI prep ANAT folder, and it will directly convert your entire output of Riptide into standard space. However, we're going to show you how to do it manually because sometimes you don't have that. You can do that with flirt. Input is the max time underscore map nifty. The ref is the MNI 3 millimeter. Apply is the .mat file, thank to standard. And for the output file, I normally just hang the STD as standard at the end. You can do that with all the scans, so 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then run it, but you have them already in your example folder too. You can now plot this all with FSLIs, so it's again the max time underscore map underscore STD now, since we standardized it, which you want to plot, and you can either plot that with the star at the scan numbers, and then you just plot all of them, and then you have to determine the range by yourself. Or you can directly do it from the terminal window as I did here with the -- display range and -- CMap. So scan 1 is first, so before revascularization, and you see huge legs on the right side. If you now go to the second scan, these legs will disappear a little bit. There's just some left, and 3, it's nearly completely gone, and then 4, it's gone as well. If you noticed, there is a difference between the maps I show you here through FSLIs and Tidepool, besides the color map I used. In Tidepool, there were parts of the lag maps which had gray parts with no apparent lag. These are the areas in which the fit of the correlation wasn't valid on a specific significance level, for example 0.01. The masks which are based on these specific significance levels are named PLT, and then the significance levels such as 0.05, 0.01, and underscore mask. If we want to use these masks, we can standardize them as well. Or if you have done Riptide to standard, everything is already there. So again, same as before, if you do it manually, flirt to the MNI 3 millimeter with the example thank to standard.mat file. I've done that again, so it's in your example folder. Lastly, if you want to compare the actual timings between scans of the same subject, as shown here, or between subjects, you can normalize them. So the timings you can normalize to a reference voxel or region, for example. Here, the cerebellum. We chose the cerebellum since it has been validated as reference region for oxygen extraction fraction and PET in Moya patients. So we use a few voxels around the middle of the cerebellum at the MNI coordinate 0, 57, 27, and normalize to the average of that time delay within that ROI. So let's do exactly that as our last step. Let's do that on the VLF maps, very low frequency maps, with the cerebellum voxels you just saw. So for that, we can use FSL mask, pass part of the FSL suite. So multiply the valid correlation mask with the ref mask in the cerebellum. And then we extract the time lag value from the mask which is created. So FSL mean TS, and you see the value is minus 4.6 seconds. And lastly, subtract that number from our max time map. It's here, so voila. Now you can actually compare the specific timings between subjects and within a subject, different runs. And here again, the lag maps. This time standardized and normalized to the middle of the cerebellum. So now you can also compare the specific timings within voxels. Here again, long delays in a broad region of the right hemisphere, diminishing in scans 2, 3, and 4 as seen in the paper. Okay, we got the histograms with cortosis and lag maps. As a final part, let's look shortly at the correlation squared maps, meaning the variance explained. These maps reflect the spatial distribution of the blood signal in the brain and therefore represent the distribution of the blood modulated by the vascular reactivity in response to our carbon challenge. Pathologies affecting the vascular reactivity will yield decreasing R-square maps in the affected voxels compared to normal control data. And the magnitude, which you see here, is then related to the relative cerebral blood volume, CVV, hematocrit, and baseline blood oxygenation. I have already done the standardization of these maps as well. It's again a repetition, so again in your folder. And you can look through them, and you can look through the different scans before and after revascularization and compare them. So here they are. So scan 1, 2, 3, and 4. So look through them. You can compare them with our previous delay map run of Riptide and find a little bit the differences. And that actually concludes the tutorial. I hope I have given you the tools to look through the output of Riptide in a clinical population to get a sense of how to navigate these results. I've shown you where to find and how to extract and look at the lag distribution, like figure 4, the lag map results, which we published in figure 5, which we saw through standardization as well as normalization, and lastly the R-square maps or variance maps. You can now go ahead and look through the data, find different ways to analyze it, and I hope you learned a little bit, and thank you for listening.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Leah. Super comprehensive, direct sort of reanalysis of published results. Super impressive. Also appreciate the desktop background of yours. It always gives me yeah, I know this was a lot of useful information included in this tutorial. So any questions for Leah? You might want to take some time to sort of chew on all these results and look at the videos again or reanalyze your data yourself. But yeah, any questions for Leah? You should.
It's not just one thing to say. If you do, I think we mentioned that before, but just to drive that home, if you do in general the analysis and you do use fMRI prep or whichever bet to get the brain extracted, look what you want to use. For example, if you want to use the superior sagittal sinus, make sure it's in the map you are extracting it. I want to say that because I do a lot with it and always have that kind of problem. But yeah, if there are not more questions, we can also continue to the happy one.
One thing, it's not a question exactly, it's just sort of a point of discussion, is that I really like that you showed at the very end that how you can sort of normalize your data to compare between subjects or between runs. And this is something important to keep in mind, that all the sort of lag computations are always with a specific reference, and you should keep that in mind. You probably
and also that, yeah, also that the region, like, it's like one way we do it. If you have a better way, choose a better way, but that was for us in that instance the best way.
Absolutely.
But exactly like Ioannis said, if you have the map and you use, for example, instead of the global mean, you use extract only from the superior sagittal sinus, it takes the reference from that, and you have a certain zero at the mode. So you want to equalize them in that way.
Yeah, it's always with respect to reference. So keep that in mind when you are trying to compare lag maps between different subjects, between different runs within the same subject. Okay, so Leah, should I move on to the happy tutorial?
Yeah, I think so. We're anyway running late, so
okay, sounds good. Okay, let's do it. Okay, here we go.
Okay, welcome. This is a short introduction to Happy. Happy is a companion to Riptide that focuses on cardiac signals instead of the low frequency oscillations. You can look up a longer description on the website shown here. This is where you can go to look at the installation, the commands, the use, and the output you get and what that means. And in general, Happy is a method to extract and clean cardiac waveforms from any bold fMRI dataset you're flying around, even when the fMRI TR is far too long to properly sample a cardiac waveform. You can use it when you didn't use a plethysmograph, or you did, but the recording was of very poor quality, something we discovered is actually pretty common. This cardiac waveform can be used to track the pulsative cardiac pressure wave through the brain. So in short, Happy attempts to do 3 things, which I will go through a little bit with the code. 1, to determine the cardiac waveform over an fMRI bold dataset using slice selective averaging of fully unprocessed fMRI data. 2 is cleaning up this initial estimate using a deep learning filter to infer what the simultaneous recorded plethysmogram would be. And 3, finally, it uses either the derived or a supplied plethysmogram signal to construct a cardiac pulsation map over a single cycle of the cardiac waveform a la Henning-Bosch. So let's look where Happy is. For that, I first have to activate my Riptide suite. So which Happy shows you where your Happy is located. And then more importantly, go to your example folder, which is located under Riptide, data, examples, source, sub. And then you see all the Happy test data which are provided. There is also, if you do sub -h, you get only these. So sub happytest.nii.gz is your fMRI bold data. The PAR file, if you at any point want to play with motion correction. There is the JSON file, which is where your slice timing is stored, for example. So these are the important ones we are looking at right now. If you wonder how to get to that data, you normally just have any DICOM files, and if you do DCM to NIFTY or NIIX, you will directly get the JSON file as well as the NIFTY file, and everything you need will be stored in there to run Happy. So don't process your data, that's very important, and just use the NIFTY and the JSON in the beginning. If you don't want to go to the Happy website, just do happy-help and all the options will be there for you in the terminal window. Most importantly, how to use it. There's fMRI file name and slice time name and output route at positional arguments in the end, but you can do it beginning end. Beginning is actually preferably done. Some pre-processing steps for the motion, as I said before, cardiac estimation, tuning, and external cardiac waveform options. So this is where you put your plethysmogram recording, as well as what we will use right now, the output processing temporal GLM. So let's run Happy. First CD to your example directory to make your life a little easier. That's again Riptide, data example source, then Happy, and the input file, fMRI input file, which is a NIFTY, as well as the JSON file, which is the slice timing information. Then choose an output directory and an output name. I'm using here test1. And then because we want to look at denoising as well, -- temporal GLM. And I have to use FSL sub in front of it because I'm submitting this to the cluster, but you will have a different command or don't need it at all depending on your computer. So now you can follow the process of Happy. You can do that by looking cluster output, give it stats. Let's try again. And there. So you will see, you can follow the process in the terminal window throughout the analysis. This will take a while, but when it's finished, we can go into our output folder and look at the output files. So ls or ls and your output name will show you all the output files you got. Let's first look at the cardiac signal itself, or the average over the entire brain. We are looking for the slice res cardiac from fMRI underscore time series. We can use that with show TC and dash dash format separate. And we will see what's in this JSON file. So here the first one is the raw signal, the filtered signal is the second row. Then bad points are in the third, the envelope is in the fourth, and the last one is just time. We can also look at one of the signals we just saw. So the same test one slice res cardiac from fMRI underscore time series JSON. And then let's look in the JSON, and here you see the different time courses. The second one is cardiac from fMRI underscore DL filtered. So if we just want to plot that one, we do the same as before, show TC. Now we do colon and then cardiac from fMRI underscore DL filtered. If you want to have other ones too, you can just do a comma and then the other name, whichever you choose here. And here we have the time course filtered. Lastly, to show you yet another way to look at the cardiac signal derived by Happy, we do exactly that. So let's first look at the JSON file again. Let's choose the first and second signal. So same, show TC. Same what we did before, colon, cardiac from fMRI DL filtered, and then comma, cardiac fMRI, because that's the first raw signal. And then we can choose, for example, instead of doing the temporal time course, we can look at the power spectrum by saying dash dash display type power. Here you see them nicely put on top of each other. Is your filtered cardiac signal and the raw one. We can also look at the pulsatile waveform of the cardiac in the analytic phase projection map. For that, you look for norm map or raw map. You can use norm map, just normalized. I look at the display range of 0.03 to 0.3, and I'm using hot as the contrast color, so dash CMap. You can also just plot it and then do the contrast and the map here. And you can follow the signal here throughout the brain in 2D or Control 6 in 3D. And you see this beautiful video where you can slightly make out the vessels. You can also interpolate into different things so it's more clear, or we can directly go to the vessel map. So let's go to the vessel map. You can, by the way, also go to the veins and arteries where we try to distinguish these, but just for time, let's go to the vessel. So ls test 1, the vessel star. See them, you can do both the vessel map and the mask. These sometimes work well and sometimes not as well. So you should just look at them before you use them. And here are, so you can interpolate so they're a little bit more smooth and so on. if you look at the mask, or you can just use them as a kind of guideline. Let's find the denoising results. If you remove the cardiac signal temporarily, as we did with -- temporal GLM, you can find your results in result_port.nigz. We can now plot our result against the original data in our example folder. So find that nifty FSLIs, and then the result_port. And then we can look at it in FSLIs. We can look at it spatially. It's here with the fault results above and the original below. We can also choose a voxel and use Ctrl+3 or view time series to actually look at the time course. So this is now from our new signal in here, and this is the one from the original data. You see small differences besides that one is trended. For example, in the last peak you see a small reduction, but it's very hard to see just looking at it like this. It is better to look at a variance map or variance reduced map to look at the differences. Okay, that's it. I hope that made it a little bit more clear how to use the commands in the terminal and look at the cardiac signal extracted, the phase projection map, the vessel map, and the denoising map itself. Remember, if you use HAPI, use raw data, and most importantly, do not slice correct before. Hopefully, we will soon have implemented our work to extract high-resolution respiration from multivalent bold fMRI datasets as well. But until then, you can use HAPI and Riptide for cardiac and low-frequency oscillations. Thank you for listening.
Alrighty. Thank you very much, Leah. Another brilliant demonstration, extremely useful tool. I know a lot of people, I wasn't even aware of it until recently, so extremely useful tool for people to extract hidden data from their fMRI datasets. Any questions for Leah regarding HAPI? I think there was one in Q&A, but
I think Blaise already answered it. Yeah, the Physio toolbox is amazing. So if you want to download that and use it in combination with the cardiac to get, for example, the R interval and heart rate, do that. I used it before and it's great. They have implemented the Burn, the Chang method, and so on too.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a little insight, just mention something, because for all of the demos, we've been doing the sort of the cooking show thing where, you know, we're going to prepare our meal, we're going to put it in the oven. Oh no, we're going to take out this one that we cooked before. That sort of implies that these things take a long time to run. They really don't. On a relatively modern Mac laptop, Riptide takes something like a minute to process the test data. And that's, you know, extracting the global regressor, calculating all the delay maps, iterating and refining, and then doing the GLM filtering. And in fact, we just got an M1 Mac Mini in the lab, and that will process the test data in 34 seconds. So it's not like it's really a long time. And HAPI takes something on the order of 90 to 120 seconds to process a data set.
Do we have a slide on that?
yes, I'm pulling up the slide right now. This is just, I don't know if you guys can see my screen, by the way. But yeah, this is an example slide with some of the run times for the basic Riptide commands and how these vary with sort of different, based on different systems. I don't think we have HAPI here, right, Blaise? So
No.
Yep. Sorry to interrupt you, but yeah, please continue. This is sort of a nice demonstration of how these, of how fast these commands can be executed in sort of standard computing power.
Yeah, I mean, basically, the nice thing about the tasks that Riptide Riptide in particular are performing is that they're very parallelizable. Basically, you can, for most of the operations, you can calculate every pixel independently. So if you have multiple processors on your machine, you can just farm out all of the tasks to as many processors as you have. So that's the --n-prox argument there. If you set that to -1, it will find out how many processors you have and use n-1 of them, because it needs one process to collect all of the data. And that, that gives you an almost linear increase in speed with the number of processors. Happy doesn't parallelize in quite that way, but if you are using an Intel processor, there's an mkl threads command. If you install a Python environment that uses Intel's math kernel library extensions, you can get a substantial speed up by setting mkl threads to -1 and letting it farm out various operations to different threads and different processors. One of the things that we found doing these is people are more likely to use a tool if it doesn't take them a long time. So really made an effort to try to make this go as fast as possible.
Okay. So I don't see any questions in the chat. I think the videos are going to be shared with you quite soon, as with the rest of the talks from the conference. So after this is done, we're gonna start working on that. I want to mention that please feel free to ask. I know this is probably a lot of information being thrown at you. These are new tools. This is sort of almost a new field. But what's exciting is that there's a lot of information here in your bold fMRI data. And I think it's going to be super interesting for you to extract it using those tools. Feel free to contact us if you have any specific questions. As you can see, based on your needs on a specific study, you probably will need to tailor those in order to sort of match those needs. So please feel free to ask us questions. I feel like Slack could be a nice, quick way for us to respond, but obviously that's not restricted. You can ask us via email as well. And we will send out an email when those talks are going to be uploaded alongside the talks of the conference. Yeah, any other remarks, Leanne, Blaze, that I'm forgetting here?
Just a general, if any one of you of the attendees or someone else has software they want to share, we can happily make a little slide in the webinar on that too. We always love to see other software and useful codes which we can use in our data. So
yeah, I mean, every time I find a new
don't feel shy.
tool or an available tool, I'm stunned at what's out in the world. There's so many cool packages, like the PhysIO toolbox, so I would love to hear about it. So
yeah, absolutely. We're very pro open science, so we'd love to hear other people's packages and use them for our data. We're also playing with an idea for maybe doing another webinar that we can potentially drill in a little bit more into some of the details. So if there is interest, we will send out emails and see if there is interest in that. And if there is interest, then we can definitely get together. The beauty of these Zoom calls that we can do that on the spot, so with multiple participants. So if there is interest, we can definitely do that. And
over Slack, not email, because I don't think we have all the email of the Eventbrite people.
For sure, yes. I just want to remind that, yes, Slack is the best way to, I created 3 channels, basically one for the workshop, one for sort of general research chat, and one for just general chat. I will add all of you. I'm sort of adding members as they join our Slack sort of environment. So I will try and add you to those automatically as you join Slack. So please feel free to sort of put your questions there and sort of engage in conversations. That's what we want. We want feedback as well. We want this to be a discussion and not just sort of a one-way interaction. So, and yes, so if there is interest for doing another webinar, we'll be happy to do so. This will also give you some time to chew on the presentations, chew on the packages presented and the data and the results. And yeah, maybe in the next webinar, you might have more specific questions about how to tailor those to your research needs, and we can discuss these more extensively. Yeah, so anything else, Leah and Blaise?
Well, we're kind of in the closing remarks area, but I something I was going to say earlier but forgot to. So a lot of Riptide's options were tailored to data that's been pre-processed in FSL, just because that's what I used at the time. So there are a couple gotchas if you use other packages, for example, AFNI. It will work fine for AFNI data, but AFNI data demeans, all the fMRI data is demeaned. And some of the implicit assumptions of the Riptide package are that you have variation sitting on top of a mean value, whereas AFNI demeans the data first. So Ioannis mentioned the correlation mask. You can set that explicitly. If you have a brain mask, you can set all of the masks. Otherwise, it will try to calculate the masks based on image intensities, and that can fail if you don't know that, and that can be very confusing. So if you have a brain mask, you're always free to supply it. If you don't, Riptide will try to figure one out, but sometimes it doesn't succeed. So.
Did you add the superior sagittal sinus mask to the GitHub?
Secretly, it's tucked away in a data directory, but I don't have a pointer to it. There's a lot of in the Riptide data reference directory. There's a lot of interesting maps that you can use. There's some vascular territory maps. There's some various resolution MNI maps interpolated to different things. There's some interesting things in there. I haven't gotten around to documenting them yet, and I plan to, but it's always more fun to write code than to write documentation, so I'm usually a little behind. So, okay, so
yep.
I guess without further ado,
and
have a good everybody, or evening, or wherever you are.
Yep, and I just added the Slack channels on the chat. So if you want to join those for more workshop related chat or research related chat, please feel free to do so. And yeah, have a nice day to everybody. Thank you so much for participating. It's been awesome, and we look forward to seeing you again.
Bye.